The Garner Files by James Garner and John Winokur. Introduction by Julie Andrews. Narrated by Michael Kramer. Julie Andrews' introduction narrated by Wanda McCaddon. Copyright 2011 by MGB Productions, Incorporated. This unabridged audiobook is recorded by arrangement with Simon & Schuster, Incorporated, and was produced in the year 2011 by Tantor Media, Incorporated, which holds the copyright thereto.
Introduction by Julie Andrews. My friend Jim Garner is a man's man, a lady's man, a good old boy in the best sense of the word, a curmudgeon, he'll be the first to tell you, and a sweetheart. I don't know a lady who isn't a little bit in love with him. We met over 50 years ago on the film The Americanization of Emily. It was only the second movie I'd ever made, and I was nervous, gauche, and hopelessly inadequate in the heady culture of Hollywood in the 60s and the superb team of professionals with whom I was working. Mercifully, Jim made it easy for me. He was generous, gentle, and kind, and that was when I too fell a little bit in love with him. We both admired the brilliant screenplay by Paddy Chayefsky, and to this day we agree that it was one of our favourite movies to make. We've made 2 other films together since then, Victor Victoria and the made-for-television movie One Special Night. You could say that the span of the 3 films is an index to the years of our friendship. In Emily, we were young. It was intoxicating stuff, pure fun. Victor Victoria happened some 15 years later. We were more secure in ourselves, and there was security in working together. Jim will never know how many times I copied his moves in order to learn how to act like a man. By the time we made One Special Night in the early 90s, we were in a more pastoral mode. That's a kind way of saying that we were a lot older. We shot the film in Montreal. It was the dead of winter, yet in spite of the freezing temperatures, the work felt so easy. Every time we are on a set together, I marvel as I watch Jim weave his magic. Charisma simply oozes out of the guy. He owns his place on the screen. He listens, and he gives back. My husband, Blake, who directed Jim in 2 films, Victor Victoria and Sunset, used to say that not only is he a good actor, he's a great reactor. As far as I'm concerned, few can match him in that regard. Watch his panic and fear in Emily as he heads for Omaha Beach. Watch him in Victor Victoria when he discovers that the lady he's attracted to is actually a man, except that she's not. Catch the pain he feels in One Special Night, when he realizes there is nothing he can do for his dying wife. Yet beneath the talent, charm, and a healthy dose of bravado, one senses that he's been hurt more than once. So he's stubborn, a bit reclusive, defiant too. Don't mess with Jim when he's fighting for a cause he believes in. This glimpse into his early life, the cruelty and deprivation he suffered, his years in the service, his slow rise to fame, power, and fulfillment, was a revelation for me. This memoir provides us all with a rare opportunity to get to know the captivating, enigmatic, complicated man that is the real Jim Garner. Did I mention that he's a sweetheart?
June 2011. Dear Listener, I've avoided writing a book until now because I'm really pretty average, and I didn't think anyone would care about my life. I'm still a little uncomfortable, but I finally agreed because people I trust persuaded me you might be interested, and because I realized it would allow me to acknowledge those who've helped me along the way, from friends and family to actors, directors, writers, and crew members I've worked with over the years. I'll also talk about my childhood, try to clear up some misconceptions, and maybe even settle a score or 2. I don't like to brag on myself, and I won't start now, but I will ask people who know me to weigh in for better or worse. Above all, I want you to know I have no regrets. Here's this dumb kid from Oklahoma, raised during the Depression, comes to Hollywood, gets a career, becomes famous, makes some money, has a wonderful family. What would I change? Nothing. I wouldn't change a thing. Yours truly, James Garner. Chapter 1. Growing Up Fast. Jimmy is very close to his characters. That's the face he wants the world to see. The man who doesn't quite fit into any mold but is loved. The first thing I noticed about Jim was how funny he was. But Jim is a rather complicated man and is covering up lots of hurt. Growing up, he was abused, lonely, and deprived. Lois Garner. Norman, Oklahoma, is located near the center of the state in the middle of Tornado Alley, where, April through June, dry polar air from Canada mixes with warm, moist air from the Gulf of Mexico to produce hundreds of tornadoes. If the southern plains are a giant target for twisters, Norman is close to the bullseye, having taken as many hits and even more near misses than any other place on the continent. If that weren't enough, Norman is hot as hell in summer, cold as hell in winter, and windy as hell all year round. The landscape is flat and featureless. You might even say bleak. But Norman was a good place to grow up. Everybody knew each other, and you could walk the streets at night. It was a college town of about 10,000, with 3,000 University of Oklahoma students. Now, with 30,000 students, the population is over 100,000, and is the third largest city in the state, behind Oklahoma City and Tulsa. It's often mentioned as one of the best small cities in the United States, with its performing arts center, museums, theaters, parks, and annual festivals. But Norman in the 1930s was a sleepy little town. My grandparents on both sides were among the first settlers of Norman. My father's father, Will Bumgarner, took part in the Oklahoma land rush, and might have been one of the famous Sooners. On April 22, 1889, 50,000 would-be landowners, who'd come by train, covered wagon, on horseback, and on foot, gathered on the Arkansas, Kansas, and Texas borders. At high noon, at the sound of a cannon shot, they tore out to claim their 160-acre homesteads. By the end of the day, thousands had staked claims in Guthrie, Kingfisher, Oklahoma City, and on the sandy banks of the shallow Canadian River, where my grandfather had waited for the signal along with a few hundred others who would settle Norman. Or maybe not. Grandpa Will might have slipped in beforehand. There were two kinds of settlers, boomers and sooners. Boomers played by the rules and waited for the official signal to enter, but sooners snuck in sooner than the law allowed to get the choice parcels. A few of them had to forfeit their land later on, but most got away with it. Before statehood in 1907, Oklahoma was called Indian Territory. For good reason. The Indians were there first. Many tribes had roamed the Great Plains for thousands of years. It must have been beautiful country, with shoulder-high grass as far as the eye could see, pecan trees, and endless herds of buffalo. The Creek, Choctaw — Oklahoma is Choctaw for red people — Blackfoot, Comanche, Arapaho, Kiowa, Cherokee, Cheyenne, Pawnee, Shoshone, Crow, and Apache all depended on the buffalo for survival. They used every bit of the animal except the heart, which they buried ceremonially. When the settlers came, they slaughtered the buffalo, while the government put the tribes on reservations to protect them from homesteaders moving west. It shuffled them around for decades, uprooting them whenever the territory they occupied became desirable to whites, each time promising that the new land would be theirs forever. Norman is on ground that was given to the Creek Nation in 1832. Bumgarner means orchard tender, leading me to think that the Bumgarners who came to America from East Prussia in the mid-1700s were farmers. I have to guess because I don't know much about them, and our German ancestry was never discussed. In my family, we never talked about feelings or about anything personal, like our roots. I learned only recently that my mother's family goes back to the Virginia colony in the early 1600s. I think that's remarkable, and I wish I knew more about her ancestors. All I know is that her parents, Charles Bailey Meek and Abby Womack, were married in 1904, and that my mother Mildred was born a year later. Charlie Meek, my mother's father, was Native American. My maternal grandparents disowned Abby when she married him. I once asked my dad, what was Grandpa Charlie like? I'd never even seen a picture of him. All he said was, he was a black, full-blood Cherokee. He was the blackest man I've ever seen. I don't know anything else about Grandpa Charlie because everybody pretended he didn't exist. Growing up, I knew I was one-quarter Cherokee, but I have to admit I was a little afraid of Indians. For one thing, I didn't know any. They were out of sight on reservations somewhere, or in the Little Axe community east of town. The school books didn't help. They gave the impression that Indians were savages who attacked without provocation. And our teachers didn't tell us that when Europeans came to North America, it was a disaster for the previous tenants. I never knew my paternal grandfather either. It wasn't until about 20 years ago that I learned anything about him. I'd flown from Dallas to Norman for a fundraiser one rainy night with my friend Bill Saxon. After dinner, we went back to the airport to return to Dallas. My nephew, Scott Bumgarner, our unofficial family historian, had dug up a newspaper article and left it for me with Bill's pilot. It was a report in the Norman Transcript from 1914. I picked it up while we were taxiing for takeoff and couldn't believe what I was reading. It seems Grandpa Will Bumgarner was a bit of a rake. He and Grandma Lula, a.k.a. Granny Bum, lived in Norman, but 35 miles to the north, in Yukon, Oklahoma, there was a widow woman he'd taken a liking to. Every so often he'd go on a whiz. He'd saddle up and ride for 2 days to see her. She must have been some woman. The widow had a son who warned Grandpa to stay away from his mother. Grandpa didn't listen. One summer day he was sitting under a shade tree at a farm sale when the son approached and said, "I told you to leave my mama alone." He pulled out a 9-round repeating pistol and shot Grandpa 5 times. According to the newspaper account, Grandpa said, "Don't shoot me again, you've already killed me." But the kid put the other 4 bullets in him anyway. Apparently, Will Bumgarner lived as violently as he died. Scott recently found some letters indicating that as a young man, Will had a fight in a back alley, and the other guy died. But Will was never convicted of a crime. On the other hand, Scott points out that despite the fact that Will drank and fought and may have had affairs, Granny Bum apparently forgave his transgressions, and in good moments even called him Sweet William. They had 10 children, after all, 3 of whom died in infancy and another who died of burns at the age of 6. My mother, Mildred Scott Meek, and my father, Weldon Warren Bill Bumgarner, were married in 1921 and had 3 sons. Charles was born in 1924, Jack in 26, and I was born James Scott Bumgarner on April 7, 1928. James was for Jimmy Johnson, the owner of the local tobacco shop and a drinking buddy of my father's. Scott was my mother's middle name, after the doctor who had delivered her and me. It's also my daughter Gigi's, whose full name is Greta Scott Garner. In the depths of the Great Depression, my father ran a country store 9 miles east of Norman in a speck on the map called Denver, population 5, Dad, Mom, my 2 brothers, and me. It was a combination hardware store, mail drop, service station on an old country road. Store in the front and 2 bedrooms and a kitchen in the back, and that was it. We didn't have indoor plumbing. My mother died when I was 4. I don't remember her, but I do recall riding in her funeral procession and passing by the country store. I couldn't understand why we didn't stop, because that's where we lived. It wasn't until I was 15 that my cousin Betty told me my mother died of uremic poisoning after a botched abortion. She was 26. To this day, I don't know the details except that Grandma Meek and my mother were Christian Scientists. They never used a doctor, just prayer. I have no idea whether my father was involved in the decision to have the abortion or whether he blamed himself for her death. We never talked about it in the family. Until I was 5, I played every day by myself while my older brothers were at school. Well, I wasn't all by myself. I had George, my imaginary friend. I was the sheriff of Denver, and he was my deputy. George was somebody to talk to, and I used him to get an extra piece of bread and peanut butter. By the time I was 6, I was working in the store selling peanut butter out of a 5-gallon can. I'd scoop it, put it in a bucket, and smooth it out. I also pumped gas, and in those days we pumped it by hand. Everyone called my brother Charles Bum. Jack was Middle Bum, and I was Little Bum, though I eventually grew to be physically bigger than both of them. They also called me Babe, because I was the baby. One of my earliest memories is of the 3 of us riding bareback on an old horse with Bum in front, Jack in the middle, and me in the rear. Every once in a while they'd get mad and scoot me off the back. We rode that horse to a one-room schoolhouse. When we didn't have the horse, we had to walk, and I swear we often went barefoot, but not in the snow. When I was 7, the store burned down, and we moved to Norman. There were rumors my father set the fire. I don't know if he did, but it wouldn't shock me. In those days, people did all kinds of things to survive. It wasn't something we ever talked about in the family. After the store burned down, my father basically left us to fend for ourselves. We were shuffled back and forth among relatives. I stayed with Grandma Luella Bumgarner at first, and then with Grandma Meek, Abby Womack Meek. We called her Ma. She was a feisty little 90-pounder, Scotch-Irish, brilliant, and so sweet. I could ask her for anything and she'd give it to me, and if she didn't have it, she'd get it. I can still hear her calling me for supper. "Jimmy James Scott Bumgarner, get in here this very minute." Without my own mother there to take care of me, I grew to love Ma very much. During that period, I also lived with my Uncle John and Aunt Leona Bumgarner, while Bum and Jack were with other relatives. We brothers all lived in Norman, but we didn't get to see each other much. Uncle John and Aunt Leona were good people, as close to parents as I could have gotten. I, along with everybody else in the family, called her Aunt Leonie, but Leona was her real name. I loved Uncle John and Aunt Leonie, and they loved me. Their 3 children accepted me as one of the family. Uncle John was a county commissioner, and he had a little dairy farm outside town. I loved to help him make butter and cream, and he was smart. In the wintertime, we used to sit in front of the fire with a dictionary to try to find a word he didn't know. I could never stump him. He knew the meaning of every word and the spelling and the derivation. He'd had some Latin because he'd studied to be a doctor and worked as a linotype operator and proofreader at the Norman Transcript. Uncle John wasn't much to look at. His shirt-tail was always half out, and his hat was never blocked quite right. But I thought he was the most successful man in the world, because he was content with what he had. And he had something many men never get: self-respect and the respect of everyone who knew him. Our home entertainment consisted of a crystal set, a homemade radio you listened to with earphones. It wasn't powerful, and you couldn't pick up many stations. You were happy to get dance music. If you were really lucky, you'd pull in Fibber McGee and Molly, or the Grand Ole Opry. We went to Saturday movie matinees. I liked all the heroes: Gary Cooper, John Wayne, Jimmy Cagney, and Henry Fonda, whom I saw in The Grapes of Wrath when I was 12 or 13. I was amazed that they actually made a movie about people like me, though I didn't like the term Okie for migrants who'd lost their farms during the Great Depression. The term's been widely used ever since Merle Haggard's song Okie from Muskogee in 1969. But a lot of Oklahomans still don't like it, including me. Fonda played Tom Joad, a young ex-convict whose family loses their farm in the Dust Bowl. With simple eloquence, he voices people's outrage at the greedy bastards who got the country into the Great Depression. I still remember his line, "I'm just trying to get along without shoving anybody." Spencer Tracy was my all-time favorite. Though I was only 9 or 10 years old, I remember him as Father Flanagan in Boys Town, and as a Portuguese fisherman in Captains Courageous. I couldn't believe that one man could play such completely different characters so convincingly. I loved Western stars, such as Hopalong Cassidy, Buck Jones, and especially Bob Steele, because he was a little bitty guy. He had to reach up to punch someone. He was a terrific athlete. He could run up and jump on a horse from behind and land smack in the saddle. I got to know Bob and played golf with him years later in Los Angeles. He was a good player and a wonderful guy. Everyone called him the Little Sheriff. We attended the McFarland Methodist Church on Sundays. It wasn't anything we enjoyed. Sometimes we'd set out for church dressed in our little black suits, but take a detour to Massey's drugstore. My father wasn't much of a churchgoer, and Uncle John and Aunt Leonie weren't exactly devout either. They were fair-weather Methodists. If it was raining too hard, they didn't go. I count myself lucky they didn't jump all over me with Jesus, or with that hellfire and damnation crap. I had a lot of doubt. There were just too many miracles in the Bible for me. I still feel that way, and I haven't attended church since I was a teenager. I don't like people who try to ram their religious beliefs down my throat. Hey, if it works for you, fine. But it doesn't work for me, okay? On the other hand, more than once I've tried to pray my way out of a tight spot, all the while thinking, I wonder if this works. The Depression hit Oklahoma hard. Crop prices plunged and foreclosures and unemployment soared. There were bread lines, soup kitchens, and Hoovervilles, temporary settlements where the homeless lived in crates and cardboard boxes. Drought turned the overworked soil to dust, and when the winds came, big hunks of Oklahoma, Kansas, Colorado, and Texas just blew away. They called it the Dust Bowl. Small farmers got wiped out. The land was useless, and many saw their houses destroyed by storms. Most were sharecroppers who didn't own their farms, so the Okies packed up and pulled out, flooding the highways in their broken-down trucks and jalopies, just like in the Grapes of Wrath. Most drove west on Route 66 all the way to California. I remember seeing my father donate a few gallons of gas to countless travelers to help them get down the road. Norman fared a little better than the rural areas, I guess because Oklahoma University and the State Mental Hospital employed a lot of people. And there were WPA projects in Norman as part of President Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal that put men to work constructing public buildings, many of which still stand. We got by. We didn't have much, but nobody we knew had much either. We ate, slept, and played. What more could a kid want? I didn't have any great desire for things, and still don't. My father eventually remarried. Her name was Wilma, but everyone called her Red because of her red hair. The family was reunited. Dad, Red, and my brothers and I all moved into a rented house together. But it wasn't a happy home. Dad had hooked up with a man in Norman who owned 2 men's stores. Shorty was about 6'5". Like my dad, he was a widower with 3 boys. They had something else in common. They both liked to drink whiskey. They spent a lot of time together, and Shorty provided work for Dad building cabinets for the stores. Dad was also a part-time fireman. He did whatever he could to make a living. He worked hard whenever there was work to be had, but he drank too much. Dad would come home drunk as a goat and make us sing for him or get a whipping. I hated to perform like that. I developed a phobia about getting up and talking in front of people. I wouldn't have passed speech class if my football coach hadn't been the teacher. To this day, I'm scared of public speaking. That's why acting was hard for me at first. I had to make a conscious effort to get over my fears, and I've had to work hard at that easygoing manner you see on the screen. I'm okay in front of a camera because I'm surrounded by familiar faces, and I know I can do it again if I mess up. But I could never have been a stage actor. It was a small house. From the room where my brother Jack and I slept, we could hear everything my dad and stepmother did. They fought like two men. They got into some real knockdown dragouts, and she actually could knock my father down. Red was a nasty bitch. She enjoyed beating the bejesus out of us. Sometimes she'd make us go out and cut willow switches so she could whip our butts with them. Other times she'd fly into a rage for no reason and hit us with whatever was handy, whether a stick or a board or a spatula. She loved to hit me with a spatula, and she had a favorite one for the purpose. I'll never forget that spatula. I don't know why, but she picked on me especially. She gave me all the dirty chores, and when something needed to be blamed on someone, it was always me. Red singled out Jack for a different kind of abuse. I lost my virginity to her when I was just a little kid, he told me when we were teenagers. I must have been in the 3rd or 4th grade. I didn't really know what the hell was going on at the time. Later I realized what she'd done. I try not to think about it. On top of the beatings, Red liked to put me in a dress and make everyone call me Louise. Whenever I did anything wrong, I'd have to go put that dress on. My brothers would tease me and call me Louise, and a fight would break out. And then I'd go hide. Now they'd put that woman in jail for what she did to us. But in those days, nobody cared. I'll tell you, it got to me. I became introverted, and it took a long time before I came out of my shell. I hated being ridiculed and never wanted to feel that way again. I think the experience shaped my acting style. I've always kept my tongue in my cheek and a twinkle in my eye because I want people to laugh with me, not at me. I don't want them to think I take this play-acting thing too seriously. I think it also gave me sympathy for the underdog. I can't stand to see big people picking on little people. If a director starts abusing someone in the crew, I'll butt in. I finally took care of the problem with Red when I was 14. One day in the kitchen, she raised her hand to me with that spatula, and a voice inside me said, "You're too old to take this anymore." I flattened her with one punch. The next thing I knew, I had her down and was choking her. Luckily, Dad and Jack came in just as she was turning purple and pulled me off her. Otherwise, I don't think I'd have let go until she quit breathing, because I thought she'd kill me if she got up. Dad automatically took Red's side. He and Jack held me down while she took her revenge with the spatula. But a few hours later, Dad asked her what I'd done to deserve a whipping in the first place. "Well, he did something," she said. Dad wanted to know what. "I don't remember, but I know he did something." "You mean you were going to beat the hell out of the kid, but you don't know what he did to deserve it?" They had it out right then and there. Red moved out of the house within a week, and Dad lit out for California soon thereafter, leaving us on our own again. Years later, while I was doing Maverick, I was in a parade in Norman. Both my brothers were there. We'd heard that Red was in town, and we were scared because Jack and I had said things about her that were quoted in the local paper. I thought she might blast me with a shotgun or try to pick me off from a window. It sounds paranoid, but we knew she was capable of murder, and we went to the police. They assigned plainclothes officers to Bum and Jack. As the parade came through town, Jack kept pace with me down one side of the street and Bum down the other to protect me. I was out there riding in a covered wagon, smiling and waving, all the while.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?